'Cause We're Nerds, the podcast that covers trends and new releases in comics, movies, video games, board games, and much more. I'm your host, Zach, and with me is my co-host and cousin, Caleb.
Hey everyone.
Thanks for joining us in our current series, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, where we will be discussing each MCU movie in release order, all leading up to Marvel's Avengers Infinity War coming out this April. Get ready to crank up that music for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. How did this second installment of this space opera compare to the first box office surprise? Is Baby Groot a reincarnation of Groot, or Groot's kid? And how did this movie help set the stage for Marvel's Phase 4? Find out these questions and much more on 'Cause We're Nerds, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Alright, Caleb, honesty time. I've kind of hit some of the Marvel fatigue, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I think I have too. It's not so much the fatigue, it's just, we put a lot of work into this podcast for you guys.
For me, I'm like, okay, our next movie's Spider-Man. Let's just skip that.
Oh, no, I'm looking forward to Spider-Man.
No. Well, I actually just watched that, 2 months ago. That's why I'm like,
well, that's your fault.
Watch it again. Yeah. All right. So Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, the sequel to the acclaimed Volume 1. And if I'm correct, you might have to correct me, Caleb, but in our last Guardians of the Galaxy podcast, you stated that the sequel was announced before the release of the original. Is that correct?
Yeah. So basically this movie was confirmed as happening in July of 2014, which would have been before this movie came out. It wasn't like an official announcement or anything. It was, I believe, one of the screenwriters came out and basically said, yeah, this is happening.
All right, awesome. And I mean, obviously, James Gunn is back.
Yeah, James Gunn, man. What a strange choice for the first film. But that worked out, and so they, of course, brought him back. This is really, it's part of the Marvel universe. But this galactic side is his universe, right? I mean, he really decided what goes in here and how everything's going to look. And so when he came back, there was a few things that he really wanted to explore in the sequel. Some of those were the backstory of Peter, which he actually wrote during the first film, so he knew what that was going to be.
Which is interesting because with the relaunch of the comics in 2015... the comic writers took a lot of inspiration from the movie to kind of streamline his backstory.
Right. And so that was a really big focus that he wanted to focus on. Some other things that he wanted to do was he wanted to add at least one new Guardian, potentially more female characters. He wanted to further explore the Collector, which we ultimately don't get in this film, and also expand on the culture of different places like Xandar, the Kree, the Krylorian, which is the girl at the beginning of the first movie that was kind of forgotten in Peter's ship,
yeah.
As well as the Ravagers, which we get that part a lot in this film.
I find that kind of odd that James Gunn wanted that as a direction, because for me, and we'll get into this a little later, I was a little disappointed with the fact that we kind of got stuck on two planets, one of them not an actual planet, but like a living planet, and that was about it. Yeah,
I kind of disagree with you there. I wasn't disappointed. I actually like the direction that this film goes. I think that limiting the locations really helps the characters in this film. But ultimately, as we know, most of this stuff didn't make it in the sequel. The Kree aren't here at all. Neither are the Xandarians or the Krylorians. So the movie took a much different route once he actually started writing the script.
Well, and with that new route, we also get a whole new list of cast members. Well, some new cast members.
That's right. We get Kurt Russell as Ego. Now, Zach, were you familiar with Ego as a character?
Ego the Living Planet?
Ego the Living Planet.
I definitely am. We'll get into that a little bit later. Are you familiar with Kurt Russell as an actor?
Of course. Who isn't?
The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China, Tombstone... And of course, his best movie to date, Sky High.
I actually do like that movie.
That was such a bad movie.
No, it's not that bad. I saw it on TV a couple years ago. It's really not. It's a good kids superhero movie.
Now, apparently, some other actors that were up for this part would be Christopher Waltz, Viggo Mortensen, Alex Baldwin, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, Mel Gibson, Liam Neeson, and of course, Caleb, Gary Oldman.
Wow. That's a really, really big list of very different actors. I mean, Viggo Mortensen, best known for Aragorn in Lord of the Rings, that would have been very different.
I don't know how many of those people were actually considered or just kind of put on a list to talk to later. I do know somebody who was actually approached was Matthew McConaughey, as they wanted him to play Ego, and unfortunately he actually passed it on for the movie The Dark Tower.
Wah, wah.
Yeah, exactly. Bad choice by Matthew.
Yeah, another person that they actually wanted to bring in here was David Bowie.
Oh.
Yeah, Gunn wanted him as one of the original members of Yondu's Ravagers. Unfortunately, Bowie passed away before the movie could start filming, so that obviously was not able to happen.
Yeah, I know that would have been really interesting, and actually not only James Gunn wanted that cameo, but apparently Kevin Feige was on board with David Bowie making an appearance.
Yeah, I think it would have been cool.
We also have Pom Klementieff, who is playing Mantis. I looked up her filmography. This is basically her big break. She didn't really do much before this movie.
Yeah, I don't know her from anything else before or after this film, so this is, you're right, her really big break.
We get Sylvester Stallone, which needs no introduction, as Stalker Ogord. On guard!
Yeah, Mr. Stakar Agord. This is one of the original Guardians. Yeah, Starhawk, as you said. So it's nice to see him here. I'm not sure if he really fits, but we'll get into that later.
Exactly. We do have Elizabeth Debicki as
Aisha.
Yeah, were you familiar with her as an actress?
I recognize the name, but I couldn't tell you who she was or anything she'd done.
I think the gold paint kind of hides a lot of that. I mean, she was in The Great Gatsby. She was one of the females in Man from U.N.C.L.E. With another superhero in it. Superman.
Yeah.
She also played on Everest. So apparently she was cast because Debicki is 6.3 feet tall. And the character that she played, Aisha, is like extremely tall. And so not only did they get a tall female to play this role, but they also put her in heels.
Wow.
Yeah, so she was like 7 point something, I think it was like 7.5 feet tall during the filming of this movie.
Yeah, and I mean, that would make sense because it adds to her kind of regalness, her royalty, which I don't think she's actual royalty, but that's how she comes across.
And finally, we have Chris Sullivan as Taserface. Caleb, do you watch This Is Us?
I don't, but Courtney does.
Okay, so I was shocked for all of you out there who watch that show. This is Toby from the TV show This Is Us as Taserface. I couldn't tell that this was Toby until I actually Googled it, and I believe it's because of all the makeup that's on his face.
Oh yeah, he's got mounds and mounds of prosthetics on that thing to bring that character to life.
Now, Caleb, not only do we get new cast members, but we also get some improvements over the latest film. Kind of in casting, but more in like technology. So, for example, Dave Bautista and Karen Gillan, their makeup time was cut in half. Actually, more of that for Drax. So, like, remember how we talked about it? They got it down to 3 hours during the original Guardians of the Galaxy to apply all of his makeup.
Uh-huh.
It now only takes 90 minutes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And for Nebula, I don't think we really talked about her makeup in Guardians of the Galaxy. Hers took 5 hours. It now only takes about 2.5 hours.
That's interesting, considering she didn't shave her head for this film.
I know, right?
Yeah. So in the first film, Karen Gillan shaved her head for the role so she could be bald. And for this one, I think she didn't want to, because that actress is kind of known for her long locks of red hair. And so they said, no, you don't have to shave it this time. And I think that shows a little bit. I don't think that she looks as good as she did in the first film. But if you didn't know to look for it, I don't think you'd notice.
Now, we also have an improvement in Bradley Cooper in the original Guardians of the Galaxy. He only did the voice. In Guardians of the Galaxy 2, he actually was wearing a mocap during the recording of his voice so that they could not only capture his voice, but they could also capture all his facial expressions. So it was more than just voice acting. He actually did a lot of facial, real acting.
Yeah, and that's something that they were starting to do a lot more between the first movie and the second movie, just in the industry. So it's not surprising to see that they did that here.
And for me, the most interesting little tidbit of information is that they did not need to alter or change Vin Diesel's voice at all. In fact, all the Baby Groot sounds you hear, that's just his voice acting.
You're kidding.
No, not at all. Vin Diesel is able to go that high. Like, I'm not joking.
I would love to see the videos of that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure they're online. It would be interesting to go look those up. Now, Caleb, as far as the MCU timeline, where would you say Guardians of the Galaxy falls?
So this movie is 4 to 6 months after the first film, so it still takes place in 2014.
So this takes place before even Age of Ultron.
Yes, it does. That's correct.
Why do you think they decided to not extend this a little longer in the movie universe?
Well, James Gunn was quoted saying something to the effect that he felt these characters were so volatile that you can't really jump super far into the future without seeing what happened in between, because there would have been some really great drama, some really great developments, something happening between those events that he would want to show. So he felt it made more sense to put it fairly close to the original.
Yeah, that does make sense, although we are going to jump into the future. 2-3 years into the future?
4,
I guess, yeah. We're going to jump 4 years into the future for Infinity War, so...
Well, I guess that the point is, by the end of this film, you really get the sense that they're a family. I don't think you get that sense in the first film, so it's more believable to say, oh yeah, they're still together 4 years in the future from now, after seeing the events in this film.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the first film was known for its soundtrack, Zach. What did you think of the soundtrack in this film?
I liked it, but I didn't love it. I didn't think it was as good as the first film's soundtrack, and apparently James Gunn felt immense pressure because Volume 1 was received so well of the Awesome Mix that he wanted to make sure that Volume 2 of the Awesome Mix was received just as well, because the first volume actually went plat. And so apparently there was a lot of pressure on him.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, that's... If you ask anyone, I think that the enduring legacy of the first film is that soundtrack, and how closely it's tied into the film. So that's not surprising at all. For me personally, I wrote down, maybe 30 minutes into the film that this soundtrack is really good, because I know it's a big complaint that it's not. But as the movie continued, I'm like, maybe it's not as good as I thought.
It has some really iconic songs. Mr. Blue Sky, Wham Bam, Shing-a-Lang, My Sweet Lord. But I just felt, as you stated, Caleb, as it went along, I don't know if it's as iconic as the first one. However, all of the 14 songs that James Gunn wrote down and put in Mix Volume 2, they all appear in the movie at some point, for the exception of Fox on the Run, which was on the trailer instead of in the movie.
Don't let me forget, Zach. I actually have a question about Volume 1 and 2 in this film, so kind of keep that in the back of your mind.
Well, Caleb, with that in the back of our mind, let's crank up the music as we get into the movie.
After saving Xandar from Ronin's wrath, the Guardians are now recognized as heroes. Now, the group is hired by the Sovereign to help protect their precious Annulax batteries. However, when Rocket takes some for himself, the Golden Species vow to rain terror down upon the Guardians. Fleeing for their lives, the group finds solace in Ego, an ancient celestial being. But something isn't quite right, as the Guardians soon discover a devastating new menace.
So the movie opens up in no other than Missouri, 1980. Best place to open a movie, I guess. Caleb, you have stated that Ant-Man is the best de-aging CGI. I believe that this movie crushes that. To have Kurt Russell appear the way he does, I was really paying attention to it in this screening of the movie, and I could not see a mistake.
Yeah, I was paying a lot of attention too. It's very, very good. In fact, this one you can even see the pores in his face. I'm not really sure if it was that crystal clear in Ant-Man. The one thing I will say for Ant-Man over this, though, is for a large majority of this, he's wearing glasses, which cover up his eyes and a large portion of his face, which I think helps make it more natural looking.
Was he really wearing glasses? I was not paying that close of attention, I guess, because I do not remember it. Well, that's okay, but do you think this is still the best de-aging CGI to date?
It's really up in the air for me between this and Ant-Man still. If I had to pick one, probably I would pick this one, but I do know that they used a whole lot of makeup. I think more makeup here than they used back in Ant-Man, so I'm not sure really where the line is drawn between the CG and the practical makeup, but yeah, this or Ant-Man, still the best de-aging in any film I've seen.
Well, in this scene, we get Ego, who is making some fondue, well, just hanging out, with Peter's mom, Meredith Quill, and they're seen in Missouri with the idea that they have a budding romance, that she will get pregnant, and we also see that Ego has been leaving some type of plant on this earth that will come back to play kind of a pivotal role in the fight scene. However, I will note, Caleb, that we have seen Meredith Quill before.
Oh, where?
Yeah, we actually saw her in Captain America. Laura Haddock, who is the same actress that plays Meredith Quill, plays an autographer, or somebody actually to get an autograph in Captain America. Do you remember the Captain America montage with that song you loved?
Yeah, the campy one.
Yeah. At one point, there's a girl who I believe gives a comic book or a book or something, and Captain America signs it. Well, that female is Laura Haddock, the actress that plays Meredith Quill. And so It's been said by Kevin Feige that was Meredith Quill in the Captain America movie.
Are you sure? Because that doesn't make any sense,
No,
seeing as
Captain
America is set in the 40s, and this scene is set in the 80s? That's a 40-year difference, and she looks like she's, late 20s, early 30s at the oldest?
What can I say, Caleb?
Except you're welcome.
Well. Yeah, she ages well. No. So, I mean, it hasn't been confirmed that she is Meredith Quill. It's just that that's the same actress. However, I would like to state that I believe that is Meredith Quill. She just ages very well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Maybe they use some of that de-aging on her in the 80s scene.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, so really this is just our introductory scene into the movie, and it comes back later. But really, from here, we jump to what we really came here to see, right? The Guardians.
That's right. The Guardians facing the Obelisk. So the opening, we have the Mr. Blue Sky song playing, which is, I thought, amazing. It was a great opening. It was basically like the first opening to the Guardians of the Galaxy. And we get some really cool scenes in this opening shot.
Yeah, it's... I love this. So that creature that comes down is some kind of intergalactic, interdimensional beast. It comes from a different dimension, actually. They don't state it in this movie, but if you listen to interviews or read any of the books or anything, they say that that's the case. And so, they're kind of talking.
No, they actually say it in the movie.
Oh, okay. I guess I missed it.
Yeah, in the opening shot, I believe it's Gamora or Star-Lord who said this is an interdimensional being, which I thought was a nice tie-in to the Doctor Strange movie.
Yeah, I agree, and I really love the colors here, but I guess my favorite part of this is just how it subverts all your expectations. We're used to these movies where you come in and there's this massive opening battle or something, and here you do get an actual battle, but you just follow Baby Groot dancing around, and it's great, and really it sets up this movie because it's telling us, look, we know we're Marvel, we know we do big action scenes, but look, this movie is not going to be about the big action. It's going to be about the small character moments, and that's what we get as we follow Baby Groot.
Which is funny because James Gunn actually did all the choreography for Baby Groot's dance, and it took animators 2 years to complete all the CGI for that entire scene.
Yeah, almost the entire thing is CG. The only things that aren't is like the 2 or 3 times that the Guardians kind of come up close to the camera. Everything else in the background is 100% CGI.
Which is impressive.
Very, because it looks really, really good. But Groot here, he's playing some music and he's dancing around, and, I like the music here. I think it fits.
Yeah.
But something interesting to note, we don't see it quite yet, but you know, in the first movie, Peter Quill had his cassette deck, right?
That's correct. Yep.
So something happened between the two films and they couldn't find the original decks they used in the first film. And it was this really big, massive deal. They looked on eBay. The only ones they could find were almost $2,000 and they weren't even the exact same model.
I know they contacted Sony to see if they could get a replica.
Yeah, and Sony didn't have any either.
No.
So ultimately, the prop master had to build his own. He made 6 of them, which, I would hate. You would have to be super detailed down to the last one, but great work on their part.
Yeah, and don't misplace small items, I guess. We also see another tech piece. It's some 1980s tech. It's what Star-Lord is using to track this interdimensional beast. And it's actually a metal football game that came out in the 1980s that Star-Lord just kind of tweaked a little.
Yeah, I used to have one of these, and I played with it, even though it's not for my generation, so this was fun for me to see.
That's right. So, Caleb, we do see Baby Groot here. Do you know that Baby Groot is not actually Groot?
All right. I've heard this, and I know that they're saying it, but you know what? I decide not to believe it.
So James Gunn tweeted on February 27th of 2018 indefinitely. So that's not too long ago, only a couple months ago. And basically somebody tweeted at him and said, Groot can grow back. Like he has regeneration powers. And basically James Gunn tweeted, first, Groot is dead. Baby Groot is his son. And then this caused like an uproar because apparently James Gunn's actually been saying this since the first Guardians of the Galaxy. And for some reason, this one like caused a huge stir. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But he basically goes on to state that it's definitive, that this Groot is Groot's son. So this is not Groot. And then he kind of goes on in kind of a very ignorant manner states that everybody should notice that this isn't Groot because in volume 2, which is this one, he has no memories of Groot. He's much dumber and he has a different personality. And he also goes on to state that all the Guardians know that this baby Groot is not the Groot. This is like Groot's son, which, you know, I don't agree with James Gunn. I mean, obviously it's canon now, so he isn't Groot, but I just thought he was Groot regenerating himself and just acted like the way he did because he's a baby and later a teen, not an adult.
Yeah, look, I love James Gunn. I think he is one of the best directors Marvel has in terms of being social with the fans and letting them know what's going on. But I don't buy this. And part of the reason is, yeah, he doesn't have any memories. Maybe it's a clone. It's just part of him. You know, it doesn't have to be the full him. And nothing the Guardians say or do indicates that this is a different character, just that he's a different age, like you said, Zach. So I have issues with this, especially when you consider the fact that original Groot died, and so a twig from him is his son?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I think for most fans, Caleb, they would agree with you and state, no, this isn't the case. And for most fans, nobody's going to care or really hear about this. They're just going to see it as Groot, not Groot's son.
Right. I think if they really want to hammer this home, they're going to have to do something dramatically different with the character in the future.
And it's during this scene that Baby Groot actually wrestles one of those Orlani pests that we saw in the first scene of Guardians of the Galaxy, volume 1, right? So it's an interesting tie-in. But apparently James Gunn stated that he wanted these rat kind of dino creatures everywhere in the galaxy. And I believe, I mean, that's kind of true to this movie. Is you see them everywhere in this movie as the idea that they're like a rat that has invaded basically every planet.
Yeah, and I kind of like that idea. It's kind of like kudzu, that plant, that viney plant that just grows everywhere that was brought over from a different country over to the U.S. and it just invades. So I think that the idea that happened with a different species across the galaxy makes complete sense.
Yeah, really interesting.
Also, here, Zach, I have some questions about Gamora and Drax. You mentioned up top that some of these people had smaller makeup times, and I think that they look a little bit different. So, for example, Gamora's face, she's always had these markings on it. I feel like in this movie, they're really, really highlighted.
I could maybe see that. I don't I couldn't tell anything differently, but I wasn't really focusing on it.
Yeah, I guess watching them in close succession like this, they seem almost like they painted like a glitter paint into these recesses, these marks she has on her face, as well as really highlighted the yellow that's around her eyes, which she has in the comics. So that was kind of interesting. And then for Drax, he looks like way more speckled in this film too.
Like his tattoos engraved on his body?
No, like his actual skin, like the green parts of his skin, it looked more speckled, like there was a different shade kind of speckled all over his body versus more of the solid tone that he was in the first film.
I mean, that might be true, but I think makeup artists are allowed to make slight changes. We talk about how in the Avengers, they change their costumes basically every single movie, and I think making minor changes to these characters works.
Yeah, I don't think it's breaking or anything like that. It's just interesting.
So it's after the Guardians of the Galaxy defeat this interdimensional monster that they step before the High Priestess, Aisha, and the Sovereign.
Now, Zach, Aisha is actually from the comics. The Sovereign aren't. They're original for this film. Do you know anything about her from the books?
Yeah, so she is completely different, kind of, in the comics. She appears in Incredible Hulk Annual Number 6, which was in 1977. And like how she was created was there was a scientist group known as the Enclave, and they created a male, yes, pay attention, a male human called Paragon. And Doctor Strange actually helped them create this individual. And then Doctor Strange figured out he was tricked, so he teamed up with the Hulk, which is why it's a Hulk comic, and they tried to kill him. And before they could kill him, he returned into a cocoon to kind of like save his body. And so when this Paragon creature came out, he was now a girl. And he called himself, or she, I don't even know, she called himself just her, that was like her name, and she was a gold-skinned female. So over the years, she has kind of played a huge role in some of these cosmic comics. She's been known as her, Kismet, and finally Aisha. And one interesting thing about her in the comics is that she does play a role in, I believe, Annihilation or another later comic where she resurrects Adam Warlock.
Yes, which is a character we'll talk about a bit later in the film, but a big player in the cosmic side of Marvel.
Yeah, so she's in the comics, but just kind of different.
And so basically it's here that we get a sense that they hired the Guardians and, they're kind of stuck up and they get Nebula back. I guess the Sovereign had captured Nebula. So that's the whole reason the Guardians decided to do this to begin with. Rocket steals some of their fancy batteries that they were hired to protect. They don't know it yet, but they have insulted the Sovereign and they will ultimately come after them.
That's right. So as they're flying away on the Milano, after your required male superhero shirt off scene in the movie,
yes, yeah,
the fleet of the Sovereign go after the Milano in this really cool chase scene, I thought. And to me, I don't know if this is true, but it felt like James Gunn was trying to channel the idea of a 1980s arcade. Because the ships here, they have a video game sounds, like video arcade sounds when they fire. The idea of that they're controlled by drones and that each person, has a drone. And then finally, when the Milano's escaping and there's only one drone left and everybody's crowding around him, that's kind of like everybody crowding around an arcade machine.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what he's doing. In fact, I think these sounds are from Galaga, if I'm correct. So that's exactly what he's going for, I think. And I think it's really funny. And even before we get there, we get a couple scenes with the Guardians aboard their ship. And I just want to say, in Avengers Age of Ultron, I mentioned how the banter between the characters was fantastic because they're together the whole time. I think the same thing goes here. The banter between these characters is great. It's changed a little bit from the first film in that I think it's a bit more crude here, but it is just as funny.
Yeah, great conversation and interaction between the characters.
But jumping back, as the Guardians are trying to escape the Sovereign, they come up to a quantum asteroid field, which is basically these asteroids that teleport around, and they decide to go through it. And Zach, I don't know about you, I got a really big Star Wars Empire Strikes Back vibe here.
Was it because of the asteroids or because Drax has famously huge turds?
No, not the last one, because the asteroids. Yeah, it's kind of like when they go through and then C-3PO's like, oh, the chances of making through this are 3 million, blah, 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 to 1.
Never tell me the odds.
Yeah, right. And then Drax is like, oh, to make it through here, you'd have to be the best pilot in the universe.
Sure, yeah, you know what? Now that you say it, I could definitely feel the Star Wars vibe. But then again, this is a space opera and Star Wars is too, so I think there's a lot of similarities between Guardians of the Galaxy and Star Wars.
True. And so they ended up making it through the asteroid field, and they're about to get destroyed when suddenly all of the Sovereign ships are destroyed, and they see this strange man surfing on a giant egg.
Yeah, waving at them.
Yeah, waving at them.
Now, they do make a jump, though, as they were fleeing. Peter had him locate the nearest surviving planet. Caleb, do they ever mention how they make these jumps? Because it's not like light speed in Star Wars. They're just able to somehow go through space in a short amount of time, or like interdimensional travel. I'm not really sure how it works.
I think it is light speed, but it's just visualized differently. If you think of light speed, it's basically you enter from one end, like for example, Star Wars. While they're in it, they're just in this like blue tube, and then they pop out somewhere else. If you were to take out that blue tube section, it would look a lot like it does in this film.
Fair enough.
It's not actually explained in the film, but that's my take on it.
I like it. So the Guardians actually do crash in a planet called Burhurt, which actually doesn't make an appearance in the comics, and it also appears in an Hulk comic, an Incredible Hulk issue 111, so 111, which was in 1989, and that issue also involves a crashed ship, but that's basically all the similarities.
Yeah, and I think that's the only time it's seen in the comics, too.
Yeah.
And so, they're just hanging out here for a while, and then down flies that egg ship that we saw earlier, and who walks out but a man named Ego.
And the reveal happens pretty fast that, I'm your dad, Peter.
Yeah, and this was not something that hid either. This was in all of the marketing. This was very heavily talked about on Twitter and social media, because James Gunn really likes to talk to his fans there. This is not the mystery of the film, right? In fact, James Gunn said that they didn't want this to be what the whole film was about. They wanted it to be about Peter and his father, and he felt that if they didn't reveal the mystery of who his father was, which was a big part of the first film, people would feel that that's all this film was about, or that that's all they're thinking about. Because this is a pretty big change. In the comics, Peter's father is a guy named Jason or Jason. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. It's J''S-O-N. And so, big change.
Yeah, it is a big change in the comics, because Ego is in the comics, but he has no connection to Star-Lord whatsoever. In the comics, he's Ego, the living planet. So he was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in a Thor comic, Thor issue 132 in 1966. And he was created in the comics as like a mixture of a star going nova and a scientist's kind of experiment. And the scientist's name was Egros, which is why his name is Ego. And it kind of melded and became a sentient planet, who then battled Thor, the Fantastic Four, Rom, Galactus, and the Silver Surfer. He plays kind of a minor role in different comics, like Maximum Security. But that's pretty much it. I mean, he has some similarities in the movie, like he has tentacles that he uses, but I mean, he's a huge planet. Now, I will say this, that in the comics, there is something called Ego Prime, where he does make himself into like a little humanoid, or kind of part of his body. And on the planet, he has people that kind of run around that kind of look like Ego in this movie, but they're more antibodies than like him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so the big takeaway here is that in the comics, he is 99% of the time just a giant planet with a giant face on it.
That's right, and a giant mustache on that giant face.
Yeah, right. And actually, this character was not owned by Marvel for film rights. This character was actually owned by, I believe, Fox for a while, because it was part of the Fantastic Four rights.
Yep.
And Marvel actually made a trade at one point to get him back specifically for this movie, which is kind of a big gamble, similar to Civil War, how they wanted Spider-Man in that film, and they wrote it that way, but they didn't know they were going to get him. Gunn knew that Ego was Peter's father in the first film, even before they made the deal to get Ego. So, good thing it came through.
And Caleb, you say it's a big gamble. I'm sure the Fox executives were like, you want the rights to a living planet? Sure, take them. This is useless.
Oh yeah, I mean, Fox, look, they have done next to nothing with the space side of any of their characters, so I'm pretty sure that they just freely gave it for whatever Marvel was willing to trade.
And straight after that reveal, we jump to another planet, Contraxia.
Which is a very funny pun. I don't know if you get it, Zach, but it's a planet of prostitutes, and it's called Contraxia. You contracted a virus.
Wah, wah, wah. This planet does appear in the comics. It's the planet of Maria, who is the mom of the hero Jack of Hearts, which is this cosmic hero. But other than that, this planet's not really used a lot.
Yeah, it's basically used as a way to introduce us here in the movie to the Ravagers, back to Yondu, and we do get a couple cameos here. Howard the Duck, first one, back from
That's
the first
right.
movie. And then we see some other people that, after some conversations, we learn is a guy named Stakar Agord, also known as Starhawk in the comics.
Yeah, so Sylvester Stallone here, who, if you remember, Caleb, I talked in our Guardians of the Galaxy podcast that Starhawk joined the Guardians of the Galaxy after or during their 11-issue run in 1976. Now, Caleb, you mentioned that Sylvester Stallone didn't portray the Starhawk you wanted him to portray? Question mark.
Not exactly. Honestly, I don't know anything about Starhawk. This was really my first exposure to the character. It's more just, I don't know, he's such a big actor and he just feels a little bit out of place here.
Yeah, I get that feeling as well. I've never really read a lot of Starhawk, but I don't know if he portrays him accurately.
Yeah, but look, for the Guardians franchise, I don't think that that's ever been a really big deal. As much as any of the other franchises Marvel's done, this one reinvents all the characters, I think. So, if you're wanting to go in a different direction, I think it's okay. I just wish Stallone's acting was a bit better, honestly.
Oh, ouch. Well, continuing on with the cameos, we also get a cameo from Martinex, played by Michael Rosenbaum. And Martinex was also an original team member. If you remember, Caleb, he is the one from Pluto who is made out of crystals.
Yes, and Michael Rosenbaum, for those of you that don't know, Lex Luthor from Smallville. This guy is hilarious. I actually saw him at a panel last year. I didn't even realize he was in Guardians of the Galaxy until around that time because he plays that diamond-looking character. He's all CG.
Yep, Martinex.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I really like seeing him here.
Another interesting tidbit about this character is apparently in 1990, artists had to streamline how he looked because from his original creation, each artist kept drawing him like he had to be drawn differently for each comic book and each page he was on because there's no like form of how he should be drawn. So he looked differently like every single page. And so they finally streamlined that and was like, this is how to draw him.
That's really funny. I've kind of always wondered, like, what do the sheets look like for these characters that they give artists? Because surely there's a master sheet that you're like, this is what the character looks like. Otherwise, you get something like that happening.
Exactly.
Also here, we're introduced to another member of Yondu's crew, a guy named Taserface.
That's right. So Yondu is disowned by Starhawk and the rest of the Ravengers. And while he's kind of, well, just standing there, some of the other Ravengers are talking about how they need to take over for Yondu, who has not really shown leadership qualities. So yes, we get Toby from This Is Us, Taserface. And Caleb, he actually does appear in the comics. Are you familiar with Taserface at all?
I'm not. In my brief research for him for this podcast,
Oh, no.
It looked like he's not part of the regular universe.
Yeah, he's in a kind of different universe, but it is part of the regular universe because it's melded with the Guardians of the Galaxy who have jumped time a lot. It's very confusing, but basically he appears in Guardians of the Galaxy, that volume 3. Remember there were like 5 volumes, and he appears in the third one that was launched in 1991 when they finally got their own title. And he is in the first issue, and he is their first enemy, and he is defeated right away.
Oh no.
Yeah, he later comes back and takes on the name Overkill, but then basically falls into obscurity. And apparently, he was announced by James Gunn in Comic-Con of 2016. And James Gunn stated that he wanted Taserface to be one of the main villains in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 because of how insanely idiotic this character is. Just like how this comic book character is just dumb.
Yeah.
There's really no reason for him in the comics. However, his character was kind of overshadowed with all the other announcements of the fact that we'll have Peter Quill's dad.
Right. And, Gunn has also gone on record saying that Fox does own a whole lot of the cosmic characters because of the Fantastic Four rights that they hold, and a lot of the characters he would like to use, they own. So I think that's part of the reason we get a lot of these lesser-known characters in these films, as well as, Gunn's just kind of a nerdy guy, so he knows some of these characters.
And finally, a last small enemy that we are introduced to is Tulk here, who also makes an appearance in the comics Annihilation, which was a comic I heavily talked about in our Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 podcast. He appears in the Ronin crossover, the issue 1 and 2, and he's like a bounty hunter who's a green blob, and he then gets killed by the Annihilation Wave. And that's it.
Okay, so not to get too off topic, but because you mentioned Ronin, guys, last week they announced Ronin is going to come back for the Captain Marvel movie.
That's right. So we'll have to see if Lee Pace is able to get more of a backstory in that movie than he did in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Now, also in the scene, Zach, they do kind of a retcon for the Ravagers. They mention that Yondu's group is only one of 100 different groups of Ravagers. And I don't know, they say some things here that, like, when you die, you see I think they call it the cords of a gourd or something. It almost sounds like...
The cords of a gourd?
Yeah.
Like a gourd, as in like a vegetable gourd?
No. Like,
like what?
Like Stakar's last name, like OGORD.
Oh, yeah.
Something like that.
Got it.
Yeah. Not a gourd.
I'm like, what? Where are you going with this, Caleb?
No, but it almost seems like a cult or a religion in some ways, because he says that line, but also just like a group of mercenaries, because what they do, it's kind of strange.
Yeah, watching this for the first time, I remember in the theaters, I was a little shocked that there were more Ravager groups than just Yondus. But it's a cool way to open up the universe and expand on it, which a sequel should do.
Right, and I agree. But while all this is going on, our Guardians are still crashed on Berhurt. We get some more kind of introduction to the characters. Someone that came down with Ego out of that ship is Mantis, who is kind of a different character here than she is in the comics.
Yeah, so in the comics, Mantis is actually an Avenger who appears in issue 112 in 1973 and was created by Steve Englehart, who you might remember from our other podcasts, and Don Heck. So she's a human who basically just becomes an Avenger. And so because she was created by Steve Englehart, she actually went on to appear in 3 other comics, 4 if you include Marvel. So in Marvel, she was an Avenger. Then Englehart left and went to DC Comics, and she appeared again with a name Willow. And then Steve Englehart went to Eclipse Comics, so she appeared again as Lorelei or Lorella. And finally, Steve went to Image Comics, and she appeared for a 4th time as Scorpio Rose in the Image Comics. So all the same character, just different names. So I'm not really sure how Englehart was able to tie that character into him, because usually when you write, the character belongs to the comic you're writing for, the organization. But somehow he was able to work a deal where Mantis actually belongs to him. So then finally he went back to Marvel, and Mantis went back to Marvel as well. And she's basically the same in the comics. She has the antenna, she has telepathy, and other psychic powers.
Yeah, she has a lot more powers in the comics, like astral projection, and she can control plants and things, but they kind of boiled that down here to the empathic powers, where basically she can feel your emotions and then sort of kind of control them.
Yeah, that's right.
And so Ego is trying to convince them to go off with him because he's Peter's father and he's been looking for him, but Peter goes off to talk to Gamora about it. And I think there's this really funny foreshadowing line in here where she says, look, if he ends up being evil, we'll just kill him. Which is exactly what happens.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it's here, at this point in the movie, the team actually splits up. So we have Drax, Gamora, and Peter, who all go to Ego's planet, leaving Raccoon, Baby Groot, and Nebula behind.
And so while Peter and Gamora kind of fly off with Ego, we stay here for a little bit and we see what happens to the rest of the group, which is that the Ravagers have come after them. The Sovereign have hired the Ravagers to hunt down the Guardians.
Yeah, and this is one of the best scenes in the movie because we get Rocket Raccoon here, who is jumping through the trees and has a bunch of traps and is able to eliminate a lot of the Ravagers who go after him. Unfortunately, it's Yondu who is eventually able to subdue Rocket with his screaming arrow.
That's right, but not for long, because Nebula comes from behind him and shoots off his fin.
Yeah, that was pretty intense. I didn't expect that at all. I do want to press rewind for a second, Caleb, because Yondu explains to Rocket that he was able to trace the Milano because he put a tracer on the ship, which I thought was a very poor explanation for how they were able to track them down.
Oh, so not only that, but actually there's another line somewhere in the movie where Peter says that he's been piloting the ship since he was 11 or something. All of this is wrong because they got a brand new ship at the end of the first movie, so it's not really the same ship. And also, Yondu left before they got that ship, but he specifically says he planted it back on Xandar, so I don't know how this works.
No, I think it's sloppy writing. I don't think it really matters in the scheme of the movie, but if you're really paying attention to the details, they don't connect.
Right. And so Nebula kind of works with the Ravagers at this point, and it almost seems like she overthrows Yondu with them. And we didn't mention there's actually kind of a coup here with Taserface deciding that Yondu's not good enough anymore. And
Kraglin as well.
Yeah, and Kraglin, which, if you remember back to the first movie, is James Gunn's brother, Sean Gunn. And so they ended up taking them back to their ship. But while that's going on,
we jump to Ego's planet.
Now, Zach, I don't know if you know who this guy is, but there's a artist named Thomas Kincaid. Are you familiar?
I am not.
He is a very famous painter, and I feel that all of this lush green world on Ego's planet looks exactly like a Thomas Kincaid painting. I think you should actually look it up at some point and just compare. It is very similar.
As much as Peter Quill's old Milano ship is a Jackson Pollock painting?
Even more.
Oh, no. Yeah, and it's here on the planet that Ego basically tells them all his backstory and who he is. And he explains that he is a Celestial. Now, Caleb, we haven't really seen Celestials since the first Guardians of the Galaxy. And I can't remember if the Collector talked about it. I think just in general he did. But this kind of sets a precedent that Ego currently is really the only Celestial we know about in the MCU.
Yeah, he's got this whole thing about how he felt he was alone in the universe, which I don't feel is valid because we did see that Celestial in the first movie. We saw Nowhere, which is the head of a Celestial, which I'm sure came from another Celestial that he had to be around for. So I don't know if this really gels with what we know about the other Celestials. But it's his main motivation in this film.
And this kind of bothers me as well, the fact that he is a Celestial. Because I feel like in the first Guardians of the Galaxy, they showed us what a Celestial kind of looks like. We saw the head of one that was obviously killed and then is floating in space. So obviously they can maybe vary in size. But then Ego throws all of that out the door as his Celestial form is a floating brain, which I think is one of the stupidest decisions ever in any MCU film. It is just dumb beyond belief. Why not make him some type of glowing spirit? That would have been a ton better than a floating brain out in outer space.
You know, it is dumb, but I really like this because it fits in with that crazy aesthetic that they have from Jack Kirby back in the day. And I think this just, it fits really well. No, it doesn't make sense, but dude, comics don't make sense.
Yeah, it would have fit into a Doctor Strange comic, but not this movie.
Well, agree to disagree. But, yeah, you know, I think in the movies, Marvel does a lot of streamlining. So we don't have, 150 different powerful things. We have the Infinity Stones. Here, it's kind of the same thing. We don't have like a whole bunch of different giant races of alien, they've decided to turn him into a Celestial, which I think from that perspective is smart.
I mean, I don't agree with you. But if we're talking about things we hate, Caleb, I mentioned in our opening that it was at this point I started getting a little disappointed in the movie because after Ego's planet, we don't visit another new location. That is it for the entire movie. In Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, I felt like we jumped around a lot and visited a ton of new locations. Here, we have like ships are kind of the two locations. We got a brief location at the beginning and a brief cameo as well in Contraxia, but that's about it. And I was hoping that they would explore a lot more of this universe.
That is true, and if I had to point out a lower point of this film, that would probably be one of them. But the difference is here, we get such a detailed view of a lot of these places. In the first movie, like a lot of first Marvel films, you feel that you've got kind of a sense of the world, but in the sequel, it expands out. And while we don't have 5-6 different locations, what we do have is 3 or 4 really fleshed out, I think, good-looking ones. And this was actually a very conscious thing that James Gunn did because he wanted to keep the story on the characters. He didn't want this to be a movie about, going across the galaxy and finding all these different places. He wanted to focus on the interaction between the characters and the story between the characters, which kind of ties into what I mentioned at the beginning about the Groot dance, kind of setting it up to be that thing. And so I think that's the right instinct because a lot of sequels try to go bigger and it doesn't work.
Sure, I'll buy it. And it's here on the planet that Ego explains to Peter that Peter's also a Celestial. Well, half a Celestial, which means he has power inside of him. Now, this is obviously something only the movie explains. This isn't in the comics. I thought it was really interesting because there's a neat through line through Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. There's a reason Peter was able to hold one of the Infinity Gems for as long as he did by himself. It's because half of him is a Celestial and he has that power to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I think you have to do that. If you don't explain why he was able to hold that, then that becomes a massive plot hole in that film.
It also explains how he was able to give his mask to Gamora and survive as long as he did in outer space when it shows later Yondu and other Ravengers who are getting shot out into outer space do not survive for as long as Peter did in the first Guardians of the Galaxy.
Now, a little bit before this, Zach, when Ego was explaining his backstory, we get this whole thing about how he goes to other planets. He felt alone, and so he wanted to go seek out other life. He found Peter's mother, blah, 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 right? My issue with this is that he says he imagined what biological life would be like, and he made a version of himself, which is the Kurt Russell that we see in this film. And then he went off to find other people. How did he get it 100% right? What a person was or a humanoid thing was without ever seeing one?
Because he's a floating brain, Caleb. And that's what floating brains can do. Yeah. Again, I didn't really like his backstory at all. It is what it is.
Okay. Just making sure that we're on the same page.
We are definitely on the same page. So it's at this planet as well that we have Drax and Mantis who continue to talk, and they actually kind of started to talk on Beerheart around the campfire, continue to talk on the egg ship, and finally continue this relationship kind of through the rest of the movie. I actually love their relationship. I love how Mantis has really no social interaction and how Drax is just brutally honest with her because that's his species. And I think most of my laughs actually come from their interaction.
Oh yeah, Drax is hilarious here, especially when he's like, "Oh, you're hideous." It's so mean, but it's so funny. So Peter continues to be here for a while we do see what happened to the other side of the group. They are on the Ravager ship, and that coup has continued. Yondu is tied up to a chair. And we see that they're throwing out the other Ravagers, like you mentioned, Zach. And then we quickly cut to them in jail, basically.
Yeah, and we get a little bit of Yondu's backstory here. We know that he was a Kree slave for 20 years, and then he was freed by Starhawk and became a Ravager.
Yeah, and I think that that's important to help kind of redeem his character, because in the first movie, he was a villain. I mean, it doesn't matter how you say it. He was an antagonist in that film. And so giving us this insight into his character helps us feel for him.
Unfortunately, Baby Groot has become the mascot of the ship, as they've kept it around because he's too cute to kill.
Which is a fantastic line.
And in what I think is the best scene in the movie, Rocket and Yondu have to convince Groot to go find the upgraded fin to fit on Yondu's head so he can control the arrow. And in that montage where he can't find the correct item, and he pulls a desk at one point, is just hilarious.
My favorite thing he grabs is the severed toe. But ultimately, Groot is not able to find this thing. Kraglin feels terrible because he partially led the coup, and now all of his friends are dead because the people they killed was anyone that was not on board with Taserface taking charge. So he comes back and says, Yondu, I'm sorry. I'm going to help you out. And he brings the fin.
That's right. So Kraglin has more of a story in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which is important because in the end, he kind of takes the new Yondu role.
Which I'm curious how that's going to end up in the next film, if that's going to be followed up on, or if it was just kind of a funny Easter egg at the end.
But with Yondu and the fin, he now actually looks like he does in the comics. He's blue, he has the fin, he's just missing the bow that goes with the arrow.
Yeah, and it was funny, watching the first movie a couple weeks ago, I felt like he looked off the entire time, because he didn't have the big fin he has in this movie.
I think he looks amazing. I wish he would have been like that the entire movie now.
Yeah, and they did it because they felt like the fin was too ridiculous, and I think maybe on first film it might have been, but because we love the character so much, it works perfectly.
And so in another excellent scene, I mean, I'll just be honest, everything in this shot of the Ravager ship and then breaking out is my favorite part in the movie. It's great. It's action-packed. Because then we get this scene where we have Rocket and Yondu and Groot and Kraglin all breaking out of the Ravager hold and escaping the Ravager ship. And the arrow is just zooming everywhere. And I can't remember what song on the Awesome Mix Volume 2 is playing, but it just fits perfectly.
Yeah, and some of this is kind of brutal, actually. Because not only they're killing people, but they're taking great pride in it. But as their killing comes to a close, we see Taserface, and he calls the Sovereign, and he says, look, here's the coordinates for Ego's ship, or Ego's planet. I believe is what he says, isn't it?
Yeah, which I'm not really sure how they have the coordinates for Ego's planet.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because they end up going there, but Peter just left with Ego. As far as I know, he didn't have any trackers or anything on him. They don't ever say he does. So this seems like a fairly big plot hole.
And they never mention, the Ravengers never mention who Ego is. Taserface, Yondu never state, oh, that guy was Ego who saved you.
Right. And I mean, I guess Taserface could have been around for the original time when he was supposed to deliver Peter. But if he wasn't, he shouldn't have any idea who this guy named Ego is. He shouldn't even know the name.
Exactly. It's a pretty big plot hole.
But ultimately, that is what happens, and they end up blowing up the ship and disconnecting part of it, which is pretty cool. And they do more of those ship jumps that you were asking about, Zach, across the galaxy. I think they say 46 or something, and you're only supposed to do 8 at a time.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but it's during the ship jumping scene that Rocket looks like the squirrel from Ice Age.
Yes.
Their faces get stretched, and his gets stretched in such a way to make his snout longer, so he looks like that, what's his name, his squirrel?
I can't remember his name, but yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. He totally does. And I remember thinking back to this and thinking, oh yeah, I don't mind this. Watching it this time, no, this is way too far. We veered way, way, way too much into cartoon territory.
Yeah, it's okay, but it's kind of out of left field.
I think it would have worked more in a film that had more of those trippy elements. Maybe Doctor Strange. Maybe it would have worked better in that film. But here it just feels really weird.
But, I mean, as they're jumping, we do see a couple cool things. The first is that we see some Cronins who are battling, which we haven't seen since Thor 2, and who we will see again in Thor Ragnarok.
Yes, the rock monsters.
Yes, correct. We also get a Stan Lee cameo that might be the best Stan Lee cameo to date because it changes all the other Stan Lee cameos.
Yes, we see him here very, very briefly. We'll see him again at the end of the film, but he is with the Watchers, which we have talked about in a previous episode. But just to recap, they're basically this race of aliens that observe things, and there's one in particular named Uatu who likes to observe the Earth.
That's right. So the Watchers appeared in Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's FF13, so Fantastic Four 13, to tell the Fantastic Four about the impending doom of Galactus. So they're the oldest species in the universe, and they're committed to just observing moments in the universe. They're not actually supposed to talk to anybody. They just watch. Thus, the Watchers.
Yeah, and thinking about this just now, they kind of remind me of, I can't remember what they're called, but the people in DC that are in charge of the Green Lantern Corps, they remind me a bit of them.
I don't read that comic, so I don't know who that is. But yes. So it's here basically that we, I guess, have to believe that Stan Lee is now a watcher. So all his cameos were him watching the heroes. Is that kind of the intention?
Or at least an informant. That's kind of what I see this build as. He's a Watcher informant. Either way, I think it's great. And the fact that we even see the Watchers here at all was a surprise because everybody thought they were owned by Fox. And they look really good, too.
Yeah, they do. I really wish we would just get a good Fantastic Four movie once with a Watcher and a Galactus. That's all I want, Caleb. Is that too much for a man and his goldfish to ask for?
Yeah, you know, for those of you out there who don't know, you only know the Fantastic Four movies. This is more kind of what they're about. There are a lot of cosmic and interdimensional stuff that we've never seen in the films. Well, I guess we saw a little bit of that in the most recent one. But yeah, let's get that happening. And so while Rocket and Yondu make their way to Ego's planet, we jump back there to see what's going on with them. And we get a scene here of Peter and Gamora bonding and or fighting.
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of both. I love their relationship, how they're always like on the edge of possibly being romantic, but then I love how like Peter states the fact that they're like a sitcom where they can't and then they blow out ratings because that's exactly what would happen.
Yeah, it's kind of a fourth wall break.
Yeah, it's so great. And so they end up fighting instead of loving.
Oh.
But I didn't like how that came out either.
But Gamora runs off to kind of be by herself when Nebula comes back. We didn't mention it earlier, but after she kind of helped the coup with the Ravagers, she left with a ship, one that looks a lot like the Milano. And this is where she comes back, and she's coming to kill Gamora.
That's right. So they kind of have a chase scene. Gamora runs into a cave to find cover as Nebula chases her down with the plane, crashes, and then Gamora picks up one of the guns that fell off the plane and starts shooting Nebula with it, who is about to fall down, and the plane basically catches fire and then explodes. But before that happens, Gamora saves Nebula. So, I mean, it's like developing their relationship as well, where we never know if they're fighting or if they kind of like each other, but still fighting. Yeah, I mean, they're either fighting or fighting, so.
Yeah, I mean, they're like typical siblings, right? They fight some, they don't fight some, and we get some of that here. I really like this scene. We see that Nebula just kind of wanted a sister, and that makes a lot of sense to me, given how she grew up. But we also get a continuity error here, Zach. Kind of. I mentioned...
Does it have to do with Thanos?
Yes, it does.
Thanos?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple episodes ago that I don't really put a whole lot of stock into those Prelude comic books because they contradict stuff. This is one time they do. Nebula says that Thanos ripped her arm from her body, which is different than in that comic, because in the comic we see she cuts it off herself. So...
Could it be the other arm?
No, because the other arm is real.
Are you sure? I thought she was all robotic.
She might have robotic innards, but one of her arms is completely metal, and the other one, at least on the outside, is not.
Oh, well, the more you know.
But this is kind of a touching scene. But while it's concluding, we do see Peter again, kind of with Ego, and he's learning to develop his powers. He kind of makes his ball, and he plays catch with Ego, which is trying to win us over to buy into this whole father-son dynamic so that when it's ultimately torn down at the end, it means more. And I think it actually works. It's cheesy, but, it works.
But more importantly, it's here that we learn that Peter will live forever because he has that celestial power inside of himself. And of course, Caleb, the first thing he's going to do is...
he's going to make some weird stuff.
Yes, it's pretty funny.
He follows Ego kind of into Ego's central chamber. And this is where we get our major plot twist for the movie. We learn that Ego didn't search out others because he felt alone. He searched out others so that he can kind of spread himself across the universe.
Yes, he wants to spread his seed as far as it can go.
Quite literally.
Yeah, in a plant seed.
And figuratively.
Oh, no.
And so we find out Peter is not his only kid. He's had hundreds, if not thousands of kids across millennia. And he has brought them back. None of them have carried what he says is the celestial gene. I don't like to think of this as a literal gene because that doesn't make sense.
No.
But the celestial power, right? And so he's killed them, which is what Nebula and Gamora find kind of in that cave that they're down in.
A bunch of human remains.
Yeah, and this kind of goes well for him for a while.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, I believe, freaks out a little bit. And so he gives him this foresight, or he does something to his brain, right? And what we see is Peter's eyes go black. And then inside of it, it looks like a galaxy. And Ego here says he can see eternity.
Actually, Peter says eternity.
Oh, you're right. He says, I can see it. Eternity.
Right.
Which is a call out to the character Eternity in the comics. So the character Eternity was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko and appeared in Strange Tales 136 in 1965. And he's this eternal embodiment of Earth 616. So he's like a humanoid is how he's drawn, but he has the galaxy inside of him. And he's basically the most omnipotent and powerful individual in the universe. And it's kind of weird to think about it because he is the universe and he has the universe inside of him, but he's also a humanoid character in the universe.
Yeah, this is one of those things Marvel has that we've talked about before, where they take an abstract idea and they try to make a character out of it, and it gets really kind of trippy and weird, but he's one of my favorite characters, I think. I don't know a lot about him, to be honest, but the times I've seen him, he just comes in very rarely, and it's really cool when he does, because it's a big moment.
Yeah, he actually only manifests himself when great threats or villains are present. So, for example, he has in the past when Dormammu was basically about to destroy all of 616. And then he also has appeared when Thanos got all of the Infinity Gems. And so we potentially might see him in Infinity War.
Potentially, or a version of him. I find it a little bit hard to believe that they would do that in such a packed movie, but you never know. We'll see. And so, since Peter is kind of almost brainwashed at this point, he is going along with Ego until Ego drops the major bomb. He killed Peter's mom. And Zach, this is a bombshell for him. He goes off crazy against Ego, shoots him. This kicks off the whole ending. But before we get to that, Peter says, quote, "You killed my mom." That is the exact same line that Tony said in well, not the exact, it's almost the exact. Tony says he killed my mom. In Civil War at the end, right? And so this is kind of a mother-son motif that sort of kind of repeats in Phase 3 of the Marvel Universe. Here, in Civil War with Tony, and also in Spider-Man, I think you could consider him and Aunt May that kind of mother-son relationship. And so even though this particular movie is about fathers and sons, it all goes back to mothers and sons.
That's a good catch, Caleb. I haven't caught it. I thought you were going to talk about the Hasselhoff cameo.
No, man, I go deeper.
That's right. Who does appear here, as Ego explains. I tried to be the father you want me to be, and basically turns himself into Hasselhoff, who appears quickly. And it's not CGI. It is
the actual actor. Hasselhoff.
Yeah, the actual David Hasselhoff.
So have you seen the music video they made for this movie?
I did not know there was a music video, and now I do not know if I even want to watch that. Oh, no.
So I bring it up because David Hasselhoff is in it. So at the end of the credits, we get this song that David Hasselhoff sings, right? They actually made a music video for that.
Oh,
it's
strange.
It's based on like 70s music videos. It's crazy. It looks really low budget, purposely. And it's got the cast from the whole movie in it. All the Guardians are in it. Yondu's, not Yondu, but Michael Rooker is in it. It's very funny. I think you should check it out.
All right. Well, if you're listening to this podcast, after the podcast go, look it up. And it's here, Caleb, then we enter our final battle on Ego. So...
Well, on and in.
Well, that sounds weird. Yes, but on the planet of Ego. And I don't know if you knew this, but James Gunn apparently took a lot of inspiration in this battle from a comic book, Fantastic Four, issue 235.
Yes, I did hear a little bit about this, but why don't you expound on that, Zach?
Yeah, so this also has to do with Ego. So the Fantastic Four, as you mentioned, Caleb, are known for going into outer space. And Ego has basically invited the Wanderers, who are people who have survived Galactus's, the Eater of Worlds, attacks on himself. So they come to his planet and then he eats them. So it's kind of like the same storyline that we have, in this whole movie is in that comic. And the Fantastic Four then go to the planet of Ego and try to destroy him. And we get some of the same shots. For example, Ben Grimm the Thing, the character who has orange rocks all over his body, starts to sink neck deep into the planet of Ego, like we see Drax sink neck deep as he holds up Mantis. So that shot's the same. And then the FF, to defeat Ego, detonate a power pack in Ego's brain core, which is exactly how the Guardians of the Galaxy defeat him in this movie.
Interesting. I didn't realize it was quite so much the same.
Yeah, so apparently James Gunn decided to take a lot of inspiration from this comic.
And it is around here, as Yondu is coming into the planet, that we get a shot of the whole thing, and we do get that comic-accurate face very briefly on the planet, because Ego is not happy.
And apparently this is one of the biggest visual effects of movies up to that point. I don't know if that's true or not, but I read somewhere that it has 1 trillion polygons in that shot.
Yes, I don't think it's that shot in particular. I think it's the shots on the planet.
Okay, sure. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get an ensuing battle that has a lot of the same scenes that we've seen from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. So, for example, Ego has trapped Peter and has trapped some of the other Guardians. And here we get the ship that Yondu and Rocket are flying that crashes into Ego and destroys him, like the same ship that Rocket was flying in Guardians of the Galaxy 1 that crashed into Ronan. We also, in the same scene, see that Ego crushes Peter Quill's Walkman. So it is gone. His mixtape Volume 2 is now destroyed, which was also crushed in the first movie.
Oh, Zach, you mentioned mixtape. I forgot to mention this earlier. You were supposed to remind me.
No!
So,
I hope you forgot.
Earlier in the movie, way back at the Ravager ship, when Yondu is breaking out, he asks if they have any of Peter's old music on the ship, and they do, and they play it. But we heard everything from the Volume 1 Awesome Mix, and they don't have Volume 2, but that song wasn't in the first movie, so how do they have it?
Maybe he found a different track. That's actually good. That's a good point. Since the song is from the Awesome Mix Volume 2.
Right. So he shouldn't have it yet.
No, he shouldn't. But it's a song, and it's a good song, so it's okay.
But anyway, jumping back to the ending here, we do see the team finally come together, and we get that team assembled shot here, which is really great. And we have our new characters that are part of the Guardians, I guess at this point, which would be Yondu, Mantis, and Nebula.
That's right. So Yondu and Rocket have taken the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and they have traveled inside the core of Ego to basically destroy his brain and destroy the whole planet. At the same time, we have seen that we have the Sovereign, who have tracked them down because of Taserface, and are now also inside of Ego's planet with all their piloted ships to take down the Guardians. So they not only have to fight Yondu, but also the Sovereign pilots.
Yeah, and I feel like the Sovereign could have been taken out of the end here because they do literally nothing. They come and surround the ship, and then the ship shoots lasers, and they're all dead instantly. I don't know why they couldn't have just cut Taserface talking to them, or maybe he doesn't actually get to finish what he's saying, and they don't show up at the end, because I feel they're wasted here.
Yeah, like they're just laughing at him and don't hear what he says, and he gets destroyed.
Yeah.
I think the reason they're here is to raise the stakes. I agree with you, Caleb. I don't think they're needed because basically they just keep some of the Guardians busy while the other Guardians, Rocket, Baby Groot, and Peter all try to plant the bomb. So they're just used as a plot device and then destroyed when they're not needed.
I guess that's a good point. I didn't think of it that way, so it's okay. I just didn't remember them being here at the end, and that's because they're not here very long.
And so we do get that funny bomb scene with Baby Groot running into the innards of Ego to plant the bomb and hopefully press the right button, as the rest of the Guardians try to dismantle either A, the Sovereign, or B, Ego, who Caleb at this point is reconstructing his body. And I thought this was amazing CGI because you see him reconstructing himself from dirt to like bones and then muscle and then tissue and then facial reconstruction. And it's just done really well. I mean, you can obviously tell it's CGI, but I thought it was great. What did you think?
I think everything until you actually see Kurt Russell looks fantastic. Once it starts turning into him, but before he's fully formed, it gets a little strange. I don't know if they had quite enough time to finish that up, but aside from that small nitpick, yes, it looks very good.
And it's during this scene that we also jump back to different planets and see that Ego's seeds have started to turn into those blobs that are now taking over areas. So like on Earth, it's taking over a Dairy Queen in Missouri and a bunch of other places around as well.
And actually, Zach, real quick, that Dairy Queen, we get a shot of Peter's, I guess, uncle or grandfather from the first movie here.
Yeah, I think it would be his uncle because it was his mom's brother.
Okay, so yeah, we do get a very quick shot of him here.
We also get a shot of the acting kid who plays Peter Quill, which means is there two Peter Quills? Does that make sense? Like the kid who plays Peter Quill in Guardians of the Galaxy
is also on,
when he's a kid makes also a cameo appearance on Earth.
He's a Skrull.
No. Now, my question, Caleb, so if this takes place before Age of Ultron, that means that the Avengers are together, and this is never referenced in any Avengers or even Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show, even though it's this giant alien blob that has taken over a good chunk of Missouri, like at least a town size.
I don't think it actually takes over the whole town. I don't think it gets very big.
Okay.
I think it's big enough to maybe cover, I don't know, 5 or 6 buildings. I don't think it goes much further, though.
All right. Well, these shots are included to, again, increase the threat of Ego. But for me, I thought they were kind of pointless. You could have cut them out, and it would have been the same movie.
You could have, because the movie is about Peter and his father, and not about this world-ending threat. But it was kind of cool to see, because they literally planted the seeds earlier in the film. And if Peter did not beat him here, Ego would have taken over the entire universe.
True.
So I think it's kind of cool to see. But, Peter is fighting Ego here. And we do get some really cool shots. We get a cameo by Pac-Man.
A lot of people, I remember, didn't like the fact that he turned into Pac-Man because they thought it took a lot away from the emotional scene of Star-Lord fighting Ego. I loved it.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I think he even calls out Pac-Man earlier in the film when he's talking about stuff he's going to build. Yeah, so It's a nice kind of callback and payoff. And this lasts for a while, and there's a whole lot of fighting and stuff, and not much to actually talk about until we get the big sacrifice of this film.
That's right. So all the Guardians have gotten back to the ship and are flying away as Baby Groot did correctly press the right button, and Ego's brain is destroyed, and he kind of blows up, and the rest of the planet starts blowing up, and Peter's going to sacrifice himself until Yondu swoops in to save him.
Yondu gives Peter the this kind of bubble space suit thing that we've seen earlier in the film, and Yondu dies out in space.
That's right. So redefining the word daddy, I thought it was a very touching moment between Yondu and Peter. And I was actually kind of mad they killed Yondu off. Which is good, right?
Yeah.
Because if they got me mad, then James Gunn is doing what he should be doing. It's great directing, and it's a great script.
Yeah, when I think about MCU deaths, for some reason, I don't think about Yondu. Maybe it's because I just haven't seen this film that many times. But he is right up there with, if not better than Coulson.
Oh, for sure.
And so the Guardians end up going off. They have Yondu's body, and they have saved the galaxy.
They have, and so we get some of these end scenes to put a bow on it. First is that we see that Peter Quill gets a new mixtape, a Zune, with over like 300 songs.
That's right, that's what people on Earth are listening to these days.
Yeah, that's right. Which will make James Gunn's new mixtape 3 a lot easier when he can choose up to 300 songs of the over across 40 years.
Yeah, across all of any music time. So that's probably going to bring a much different flavor to the third installment.
Do you think that'll make an appearance in the Infinity War movie? Like, will Peter Quill pull that up and be like, look what I'm listening to? And Tony Stark just be like, what the heck? What are you doing?
It might. I don't know. The only thing about that is there's so much going on in that film already. Is there any time for it?
Probably not.
Yeah, I would say probably not. And we get this beautiful, beautiful funeral scene here, Zach, with Yondu. They put him, I think, in a burner, a thruster. It kind of, I guess, disintegrates him, which sounds really harsh, but in the movie, it's very beautiful. This scene, in terms of emotion and shot composition, reminds me a lot of Frigga's death in The Dark World.
Sure.
I talked about how that's one of my favorite shots in the whole MCU. And I think that this is that same thing, but done a bit better because we knew the character and we felt for the character. So it has that emotion. And we're not the only ones because the rest of the Ravagers come in too.
That's right. So we see Kraglin taking it pretty hard. The rest of the Guardians taking it pretty hard. And then the Ravagers. So we briefly see Charlie 27, played by Ving Rhames.
Yes, which was out of left field when I saw him in this film.
Yeah, and he's the original Guardian from Jupiter, the guy who's, really strong, but not 27 times strong, just 11 times strong. And then we also get Alita, who was another Guardians of the Galaxy, added in that Volume 3 in 1990, who also appears. So we get some cool cameos. We see Stallone again, and then it ends. And I was kind of shocked that they ended this movie at a funeral. It's not a low point. It's a death, so it's a sad point, but it's a really well done kind of finish. I was just shocked that they just ended it at that.
Yeah, I did not remember them ending it at a funeral. But now thinking about it, this kind of calls back to those Sam Raimi Spider-Man films because...
Please don't. We don't want to talk about those.
No, we do. They're good.
I don't want hip thrusting.
No, that's the
Spider-Man.
third one. But the first movie in that trilogy ended in a funeral. And I think there's a funeral in each of them.
Well, the third one definitely had a funeral. A funeral of his career. Got him!
All right, moving on. We get the credits.
That's right. So, as a typical Marvel movie, this isn't a typical Marvel movie because instead of having 1 or 2 end credits, this has 5 end teasers as well as some other interesting things in the credits. So there's a lot of shots and other interesting stuff here as the credits roll.
The first one we get is Kraglin, who has inherited Yondu's fin. I guess they took it off before they disintegrated him. And he's practicing with the arrow, and he's not very good because he hits Drax with it, who screams out in pain continuously.
And Caleb, I don't think he'll make an appearance in Infinity War. I think that's just the Guardians of the Galaxy. But it'll be interesting to see how Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 deals with Kraglin as well as into the future of Phase 4.
Yeah, I think... I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he makes a cameo in Infinity War to explain where he is. Otherwise, it'd be strange. But like we said, it has been about 4 years past between the two, so maybe he went off on his own. But the next scene we get is all those original Guardians of the Galaxy members together.
That's right. So Starhawk has gathered them all together, including all the ones we've mentioned, and 2 others. So there's Kruger, who was in Guardians of the Galaxy Annual 1, after that, Volume 3, and he's the one that's like in the red cloak. And apparently in the comics, he's like a worm as well. And he, I don't know if you saw this, Caleb, was doing magic.
Yes, I did notice that.
This magic is the same magic from Doctor Strange, which I thought was a really good, again, tie-in to Doctor Strange. And that's because this character is the Sorcerer Supreme from the future who was trained by the Ancient One who trained Doctor Strange. So somehow he was trained by the Ancient One, but he is from the future, and he's tied into the Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yes, in the comics. We'll see how he plays out in the movies.
Exactly. We also get a small, like, maybe 1 or 2 seconds of another character, Mainframe, who was another future Guardians of the Galaxy. He's a future counterpart of Vision. And this role was actually played by Miley Cyrus, the head.
Yes, voiced by Miley Cyrus.
Correct. Voiced by Miley Cyrus, which, I mean, I don't think you could really tell at all.
I had no idea.
It's short. It's only a couple seconds anyways.
Yeah. And so basically here they're saying, oh, well, we're back together now. And Gunn has said that he's going to bring these characters back. Whether it's in Guardians 3, maybe a spin-off, something. These characters are coming back. So this is not just a throwaway scene.
So we'll see them again.
Zach, what's the next one?
All right, so the next one, which is probably, this is the biggest one, I would say, out of it all, because we go back to the Sovereign, and it's here that we see the High Priestess who details how she has created the perfect human being, who is Adam Warlock.
That's right. They mentioned earlier in the film how they're born in birthing pods, and she has perfected the birthing pod, and we get a shot of that pod. You know, there was a lot of discussion in the first film on if there was a pod in the Collector's Collection, and if that was Adam Warlock. Turns out it's not, because this is what it is here. And you know, they almost didn't put this in because Kevin Feige didn't want it here.
Really?
Yeah, he was worried that if they included this, people would think Adam Warlock is going to show up in Infinity War, and that's not the case. So what James Gunn had to do to convince him to keep it in is basically tell people on social media, very clearly say, look, Adam Warlock is not in Infinity War. He's only here at the end. He might be used in the future. And also, actually, Gunn had him in this script originally. He had to be removed because there was too much going on.
That's right. And Adam Warlock appeared in Fantastic Four issue 66, but he's a cosmic being. He was created with the goal to create a perfect human, and he deals a lot with the cosmic superheroes. He has the Infinity Gauntlet at several points in the comics, and he's heavily tied into all those storylines. And so after the Adam Warlock scene, we actually have two other scenes. So we see Groot, who is now a teen.
Yep, playing video games.
Which is interesting. So he has matured enough in these post-credit scenes to go from a baby to a teen, but he will not mature enough in 4 years to go from a teen to an adult.
Ah, I'm glad you brought that up, Zach. This scene is set 4 years after the movie. This is actually like right before Infinity War. This is how he will look in Infinity War.
And if you have seen any of the new TV spots for Infinity War,
which I haven't,
trailers,
please don't tell me anything spoilery.
In the trailers, we see a little more of teenage Groot.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Who is still kind of a brat.
But to cap off our in-credit scenes, we do get, again, a closer shot of Stan Lee and the Watchers here, as he kind of tells them about the time he was a FedEx delivery man, which is from Civil War. Yeah. And they kind of walk off, and he's upset because he's not done. That's
right. Now, as the credits have been rolling, we have actually seen the Grandmaster in the background as well, who is dancing. The Grandmaster, who we'll see in Thor Ragnarok, was supposed to be in this movie, as well as you mentioned, Caleb, the Collector, who both were cut.
I did not know the Grandmaster was supposed to be here.
That is correct, yeah, but fortunately he was just put into the role of the credits.
Okay, well, he's not the only one here. We also get Cosmo the dog from the first movie in the credits. Howard the duck is in here as well. And lastly, David Hasselhoff finishes out the credits as he says, "We are Groot."
That's right. And no trees or raccoons, again, were harmed in the making of this film, but the same cannot be said to their handlers.
I noticed that.
Yeah, great way to end the movie. All right, Caleb, so we know that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 was a surprise box office hit. Did Guardians of the Galaxy 2 receive the same commercial and critical success as its previous counterpart?
So this movie was finally released on May 5th, 2017, with a budget of $200 million and a worldwide gross of $863 million. So it did make more money than his predecessor, but it did not crack $1 billion. On Rotten Tomatoes, it currently has a score of 82% and a 67 on Metacritic, which I believe is a bit lower than the first movie. It was nominated for 19 different awards, which is not as many as we've talked about recently, but it did win 6 of them. Other than that, it didn't really break any records like the first one did. It wasn't this groundbreaking movie for them, so it's kind of strange that it's a follow-up, but it doesn't have as many accolades.
So it did okay, but not as good as the first.
Well, critically it didn't, but financially it did better.
Which, I mean, hey, money talks.
Yeah, and that's the whole reason they do these movies. They are a company, so that's a good thing.
So, Caleb, what's the legacy, you would say, of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2?
Well, this introduced us to our first real Celestial that we got to know. It kind of gives us a sense of what they can do, of their power level, which is really great, because really before this, we'd only seen them in Nowhere as a head, and also that kind of flashback in the Collector's area. So that was really cool. As we just talked about, they are teasing Adam Warlock. They're going to introduce him. He is massive in the comics. He plays a fairly large role in the Infinity War storyline. Unfortunately, he's not going to be in the Infinity War book. But, great to have him here. We do see that original team, which is going to be introduced more in the future. But, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't do a whole lot for the rest of the Marvel Universe. And I think that's okay, because these movies, as they get bigger and bigger, they need to also maintain a smallness to them. Make sure they're about the characters and not just connecting other worlds.
And I think it does a lot for the team itself. After watching this movie, I'm excited to see them in Infinity War, even more so than I was before watching this movie. So it connects them together and builds the team so that they can make more of an impact in other movies. Not only that, but it also sets James Gunn up with directing and kind of leading Phase 4.
Yeah, so Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 has already been announced. I believe it's supposed to come out in 2020. And as we've mentioned before, James Gunn is kind of overseeing all of Phase 4 in a kind of consultant basis, because it's going to be pretty much a cosmic phase.
So we'll have to look into the future to see what cosmic events happen to the Guardians of the Galaxy in Volume 3. All right, so Caleb, where does Guardians of the Galaxy 2 fall in your list of MCU movies?
Well, Zach, we've talked about this movie for quite a while, and I like this movie. It is a good movie. I think it is a worthy follow-up to the first one. Does it reach the same highs? I think it probably does. I think it's different, but in, again, a good way. It is a bit long, I think, in some parts. I think it could have been trimmed down a little bit, but it has a lot of heart. It has a lot of depth. And I think that's something that's very important as we move forward in these movies. And that's something that we have continually gotten more of as Phase 3 continues. Because otherwise, as I said, they just end up being popcorn flicks. This is also a fantastic villain. Up until this point, maybe the best one. I don't know. Zemo was really good too. And so this is a really great upward trend for the villains in the MCU, because as we've talked about, traditionally, they haven't been great. So I do really, really like this movie. I think it's better than the first one. So I have to look at my list. And previously, I had Captain America 2 and 3 at the top of my list, and then at number 3, Guardians. So is this movie better than either 2 or 3 of Captain America? I don't think it quite reaches there. It is very enjoyable, but as I said, it's a bit long, and I think that's one of its pitfalls. So my new list, starting from number 1 down to number 15 now, is Captain America, The Winter Soldier, Captain America, Civil War. At number 3, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, The Avengers, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Thor 1, Avengers Age of Ultron, Thor the Dark World, Captain America the First Avenger, Ant-Man, The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 3, and then Iron Man 2. Zach, tell us what you thought.
All right, so our lists are going to diverge from each other because for me, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 was just an okay movie. In my opinion, it didn't bring a lot of anything fresh or memorable. They killed off Yondu, which I thought was a bad idea. I really wanted him to stay with the Guardians of the Galaxy. I thought it had less jokes than the first one. I didn't think it was paced very well. I didn't think exploring all the new planets that they could have was a mistake. I mean, still amazing casting, amazing characters. The jokes that were in it were great. And the storyline for the most part was okay. Ego as a villain was okay as well. It just didn't carry as much weight. So when I look at my list and compare it, this falls kind of midway through the pack. You might ask why. And that is because, Caleb, I have read a lot of these comics with like Iron Man, Ant-Man, Captain America, which is why I like to see them on screen. I have never read a Guardians of the Galaxy comic, and so why I liked the first one so much was because it caught me by surprise and it was a good movie. The second one would have had to do a lot more to get me on board, and it simply didn't. So where this falls in my list then is I have to look at it, and it doesn't hit any of the top 6, which end with Ant-Man. It does. I don't think it's better than Captain America, and to be honest, I would watch Captain America as well as my number 8, Doctor Strange, before Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I do think it's better than Age of Ultron, which means Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is my number 9.
Wow.
So my new list, yeah, that's right. So my new list is Captain America Civil War, number 1, Captain America Winter Soldier, number 2, The Avengers, number 3, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, number 4, Iron Man 5, Ant-Man 6, Captain America 7, Doctor Strange 8, number 9 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which means the last remaining 6 are Avengers Age of Ultron at 10, Thor 2 at 11, Thor at 12, Iron Man 2 at 13, Incredible Hulk at 14, and Iron Man 3 at 15.
Wow, that's very, very surprising, Zach.
Yeah, you know what? We'll have to wait and see where Spider-Man ends up. I don't really know, to be honest.
Oh, now I'm worried.
Yeah, and I think some of this Marvel fatigue, and maybe just my week in general, has played a little into that ranking, but I still stand by it.
All right. Well, we'll check back in with that next week.
Well, Caleb, you know who else has famously huge turds?
I don't want to know.
Yeah. Taylor Poole.
Okay, well, as you guys know, Taylor Poole did our intro music. We love it a lot. We think it's great. And we would love for you to drop by and see if he can help you out with anything. You can find him at taylorpoolemusic.com. That's TaylorPoole music.com.
And when you're not listening to our podcast, feel free to jump on over to CNC Power Hour to watch some video games or magic. That's C, letter N, C, Power Hour. Find them on Twitch or Facebook. And finally, we have a webpage.
That's right, our new website, CauseWe'reNerds.com. You can find all the places where you can stream our podcast.
Thanks for listening to 'Cause We're Nerds, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. We would love to hear your comments or feedback at causewe'renerds@gmail.com. That's CUZWERENERDS@gmail.com. Leave us a comment or a review on iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or any other major social networking or podcasting sites. Join us next week as we cover something amazing, no, spectacular, in Spider-Man Homecoming. How was Tom Holland chosen to be the next face of the Spider-Man franchise? How does this standalone Spider-Man movie compare to the other two versions? And is Marvel setting the stage for Spider-Man to be the new Tony Stark? Find out these questions and much more on 'Cause We're Nerds, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, Spider-Man Homecoming. Stay nerdy. So, in the comic universe, she is a Kree, which means she's green. And she later joins the Avengers.
Wait a minute. I thought the Kree were blue.
No! Am I wrong? Just a second, I need to Google this.
The Kree also don't have antenna.
Mantis. Oh, I Googled this and I got a wiki page for an actual mantis. Oh, no. It was like... Oh, goodness. Okay. Mantis. She was born in Vietnam. Oh, okay. Well, then she couldn't be Kree. She was born in Vietnam. Wait. Her father leaves her in Vietnam at the temple of the alien priestess of Pama, a sect of the Kree. The Kree believe she might become... Oh, okay. Well, at least you control this section for goofs. Goofs and gaffs and funnies. Here we go.
That was so funny.
Oh. I'm just going to eat my goldfish and cry.
I love goldfish.
You better not let Baskin-Robbins finds out.
No!
They always find out, man.